Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another unreal true crime. The Juan Fernando Hermosa case. Juan Fernando Hermosa Suarez came into the world on February 28, 1976, amidst the picturesque province of Sucumbíos in Ecuador. His early life was shrouded in mystery, with no concrete information about his biological father and his mother, a humble laundry worker, struggling to provide for him. Consequently, when Juan was just a year old, destiny intervened, leading to his adoption by Rafael Hermosa and Zoila Suarez, a compassionate couple longing for children. They resided in a small and tranquil city in Ecuador until 1982, when a significant change transpired. Rafael sold their farm, and the family relocated to Quito, the vibrant capital of Ecuador. Initially, Juan's life appeared to follow a typical trajectory. He experienced the ups and downs of childhood, marked by occasional erratic moods. However, a pivotal moment occurred when he was around 7 years old. A young girl named Gloria entered the Hermosa family's life, altering its course. Gloria, at the tender age of 14, unveiled a startling revelation. She was Juan's sister. Gloria sought refuge with the Hermosa family, as her stepfather had cast her aside. Rafael and Zoila, known for their compassion, welcomed Gloria into their home. As time passed, Gloria found herself alone with Juan and chose to share a life-altering secret. Juan was adopted. This revelation, delivered without much consideration for his age and emotional readiness, left Juan grappling with profound questions. Gloria's presence also brought strife into the household, as she frequently disparaged Rafael and Zoila to Juan. Her tales included speculations about theft and flight from their home. Gloria's turbulent and disruptive behavior made it difficult for her to coexist with the Hermosa family, and she soon moved on. Juan's response to this revelation was tumultuous. As he mustered the courage to confront his adoptive parents, tears welled up in his eyes. He posed the painful question of whether it was true that Rafael and Zoila were not his biological parents. Faced with the heart-wrenching truth, they had no choice but to share the details of Juan's adoption. Some people have the notion that criminal behavior can be attributed solely to the influence of one's upbringing. In this case, Juan's adoptive parents, though imperfect, made sincere efforts to guide him down the right path. Nevertheless, it became increasingly evident that Juan's trajectory was far from conventional. Juan's journey took a tumultuous turn as he spiraled into rebellion. Crossing the boundary of typical childhood behavior at the tender age of 9. It was during these formative years that he began a disturbing pattern of animal cruelty, primarily targeting cats. He would macabrely bring their lifeless remains to school, seeking to shock and garner attention. Unsurprisingly, these actions resulted in multiple expulsions from school. In an attempt to curb his unruly behavior, Rafael, his adoptive father, resorted to occasional corporal punishment. Yet his discipline never escalated to a level that could be deemed excessive. In fact, it was evident that Juan did not hold any lingering grudges against Rafael or Zoila, his adoptive mother. Rafael's work commitments frequently led him to travel, leaving Juan with more unsupervised time. Although Zoila provided some company, her hearing impairment and struggles with arthritis prevented her from being a constant presence. Consequently, Juan found himself increasingly isolated. Completing elementary school at the age of 12 was a significant accomplishment for Juan, given his penchant for petty theft. He had already embarked on a path of pilfering, selling whatever items he could lay his hands on. Remarkably, his criminal endeavors thus far had entailed relatively low levels of risk. However, at the age of 13, Juan became embroiled in a reckless car theft escapade alongside older boys. Assuming the role of a passenger, they initially evaded capture. Their audacious greed, however, led them to steal yet another vehicle, resulting in their apprehension. Juan's subsequent placement in a juvenile correctional facility underscored the urgent need for reform within these institutions. In the majority of cases, these facilities only serve to further entrench delinquent behavior, treating these young individuals as hardened criminals. The meager mental assistance provided took the form of disconnected lectures, falling short of addressing their unique needs. Ultimately, these facilities inadvertently fostered camaraderie among these youths, often amplifying the influence of the already deeply troubled. Contrary to expectations, Juan found himself targeted within the correctional facility, not due to his physical stature or menacing appearance, but as a victim of severe bullying. Physical assaults and harsh verbal taunts became a daily ordeal. Amid this grim backdrop, a fellow inmate named Luis Anibal, merely 2 months older than Juan, entered the scene. Sharing a background of financial hardship, Luis's mother worked as a cleaner, but he had not been placed for adoption. Luis's circumstances were even more dire, with an abusive stepfather, mistreatment of his mother, and his sister subjected to similar horrors. Luis Anibal found himself on a perilous path marked by thefts and altercations, eventually leading him to the correctional facility. His presence there was not the consequence of a specific crime, but rather a desperate measure enacted by his mother, who hoped to redirect him onto the right track, only to inadvertently exacerbate his situation. Extended stays in the correctional facility, combined with shared experiences and a profound sense of disconnection from mainstream society, brought together these young men who struggled to forge connections elsewhere. In a bold endeavor, they even hired a taxi driver on an hourly basis to impart driving lessons. In no time, they became proficient behind the wheel of a car, coincidentally a taxi. The prospect of learning to drive infused these young men with excitement, for it heralded the initiation of their car theft endeavors. Their maiden foray into auto theft involved a Hyundai Accent, a venture that left no casualties, except for Juan and Anibal themselves, who, presumably due to nerves, met with a road mishap. Providentially, their escapade went unnoticed, and they managed to elude capture. Their subsequent car theft also ended in an encounter with law enforcement. However, they had meticulously prepared for such an eventuality, carrying counterfeit credentials purporting them to be the offspring of officers stationed in Quito. It goes without saying that these claims were entirely fabricated, unbeknownst to the genuine officers. Fortuitously for the boys, they were intercepted by a sergeant and a corporal who were unacquainted with the officers they impersonated, hence readily accepting the spurious credentials. Inquisitive officers questioned the boys about the car, intuitively discerning that it was unusual for the child of an officer to possess such a vehicle. Displaying remarkable cunning, the boys explained that it was a stolen car their father had managed to recover. The officers, harboring suspicions, suggested changing the vehicle's tires. It's important to note that some may not be familiar with the prevalent practice in Latin America, where police recover stolen cars, strip them of valuable parts for resale, and subsequently lay blame on the thieves for causing damage to the vehicle. The boys consented, offering to replace any components with lower quality substitutes in exchange for monetary compensation. The officers agreed, and an arrangement that left all parties content ensued. This modus operandi persisted for a while, initially yielding limited results. While leaving a disco with friends on November 22, 1991, The Juan and his group took a taxi. Hermosa pulled out a pistol obtained through a guard, shooting the driver in the head and killing him instantly. One of his friends then drove the vehicle to the southeast of the city and disposed of the body in the Los Chios Valley, where the body was found by police the next day. A week later, Hermosa went with other members of his gang to a hairdresser where he usually fixed his hair, operated by a transgender named Charlie. Charlie invited them to drink at home, where they started an argument which ended in Hermosa shooting Charlie 5 times before he could ask for help. Hermosa's crimes totaled 22 murders, occurring in only 4 months, claiming the lives of 8 taxi drivers, 11 homosexuals, a truck driver and his acquaintance, as well as 2 others, earning him the nickname, the Kid of Terror. The victims were shot to death with a pistol, the crimes occurring during the weekends, which caused a panic among the taxi drivers and homosexuals who lived in northern Quito. One fateful morning, patrolling officers were alerted by what sounded like gunshots, prompting them to initiate a strategic sweep of the vicinity. Guided by the direction of the gunshots, they arrived on an almost deserted street, where a taxi was observed traversing the area. Reacting swiftly, the officers accelerated, overtaking the taxi and discerning the presence of several minors inside. Recognizing that the police were in pursuit, the young individuals accelerated, yet the officers were undeterred, maintaining their vigilance. And when they realized that escaping in the taxi wasn't going to be possible, they stopped and opened all 4 doors to run in opposite directions. They were only able to capture one suspect, and that was Luis Anibal. Luis was taken to the police station, and they began questioning him to get a confession, but he didn't utter a single word. Days passed, along with threats because the taxi he fled from belonged to a man who had been murdered a few hours earlier. Still, Luis remained silent until a group of boys came to visit him to see what was going on with him. This seemed odd to the police because they had kept this capture hidden, and only a few relatives knew that Luis was there. These boys, seeing that Luis couldn't get out, left the place. But the officers, seeing that the presumed suspects were minors and their profile matched perfectly, assigned an undercover officer to see what their next moves would be. Throughout the day, the detective saw that these boys seemed to spend the whole day together, hanging out in the streets. In the evening, they entered a nightclub, and more agents were called to see if they would take the bait that was about to be set. In the early morning, when the boys left the nightclub, a taxi passed nearby, and they stopped it. Several agents were already following the taxi, and indeed, these boys had the intention of assaulting the taxi driver, but he was also an agent, and practically the whole gang of terror was captured. But their leader, Juan, had not been with them. Under pressure, the boys confessed, but they claimed they were not responsible for the murders and that Juan Carlos was the culprit. Juan Carlos was the name Juan Fernando used to have a different identity as a criminal and protect his real identity. In contrast, Luis used the alias Santiago. The police began to investigate Juan Fernando Hermosa and found his address. At that time, Juan lived with Zoila, and Rafael was not at home. On January 14, 1992, in the early morning, several officers began to surround Juan's house and entered through a skylight. Juan realized this, grabbed his gun, and a shootout ensued. Unfortunately, since he was sleeping in the same bed with his mother, and she may not have heard due to her deafness, she stayed in bed. In the exchange of fire, Zoila was hit by 19 bullets, leading to her death. Juan attempted to escape, threw a grenade at the police, and when he was climbing out of a window to escape, he was captured. Subsequently, following Juan's grenade launch, testimonies surfaced from both Juan and the neighbors, attesting that it was, in fact, the police who had lobbed the grenade. Countless enigmas envelop the circumstances leading to Zoila's tragic fate. It raises questions about why she was swiftly transported away in an ambulance when it was patently evident that she had already departed from this world. Standard procedure dictates that when someone is unmistakably deceased, they should remain at the scene for forensic evaluation. Upon his arrival at the police precinct, Juan unambiguously declared, as I quote, "I want to clarify that my name is Juan Fernando Hermoso Suarez, and on February 28th, I will celebrate my 16th birthday." This stratagem was employed to exploit legal provisions, given his status as a minor, and it elicited an explosion of media coverage. Juan ascended to a newfound level of notoriety, capturing the headlines in every newspaper. On numerous occasions, he participated in interviews for which he received compensation. Juan took all the blame for himself and wanted to leave his companions out of it. However, seeing that he also didn't want to receive many years in prison, he began to create excuses, claiming that a supposed general, who does exist, had hired him to commit all these crimes because of the death of his daughter, which was attributed to a supposed taxi driver. This was taken seriously because the other kids also started saying the same thing. The authorities were so stirred by this that they seriously began to investigate the general. They asked these kids about how he looked, and they said he was of average height and had prominent hair, but that wasn't accurate. He was tall and always had a military haircut. It also makes perfect sense that a general with all the connections in the world would hire a 15-year-old kid like Juan, who was a complete stranger. The authorities dismissed the accusations, and Juan began to make more excuses. Now he claimed that the taxi drivers were responsible for their own deaths. Clearly, he was still a child. He insisted that the last thing he wanted was to kill. He stated, "I asked them to stay still, that nothing would happen to them. But that didn't happen. Once again, I was threatened with a revolver, so I used my weapon. And a taxi driver tried to hit me with a lug wrench, so I was also forced to shoot." But even if that were true, this excuse wouldn't hold up because he had murdered 22 people by that point. There was no way he could be saved because he was young. It's not like he was suddenly going to turn his life around, and Juan confirmed this. At the time of his trial, Juan was already 16 years old and was sentenced to just 4 years at an orientation center because that was the maximum penalty for a minor in Ecuador. Juan underwent several psychological exams, which mostly described him as an organized psychopath. This type of psychopath tends to be natural leaders, and it was within 16 months of being in that center that Juan formed a gang and devised a plan to escape. He had a girl who had accompanied him in a previous taxi robbery arranged to meet him on the day of his visits. They had agreed that she would deliver a pistol to him so he could escape. In a juvenile center, the security wasn't as high, and Juan knew that at some point there would only be one guard watching the exit. When this happened, he seized the opportunity and shot the sole remaining guard with 5 shots, causing his death. Immediately, Juan and 10 other young people managed to escape from there. The news once again exploded, and somehow, Juan quickly managed to escape to Colombia. Reaching Bogota, he began to live off the sale of stolen jewelry, but being in a new country where he was also being pursued, he couldn't steal as easily as he could in Ecuador. So shortly after he was found, and tired of going hungry, he told the police, "Yes, I am Juan Fernando Hermoso," and he was sent back to Ecuador. He was temporarily placed in a high-security cell, but was soon returned to the same orientation center from which he had escaped before. However, this time, he didn't escape again. He didn't even serve the initial 4-year sentence they had given him, despite having killed a guard and escaped to Colombia. Many couldn't believe it, but in January 1996, Juan was already free. And this obviously caused a lot of resentment in many people who saw the judicial system as a failure. Juan returned to his childhood town, where he began to live with Rafael. In the early days, Juan seemed enthusiastic about finding a job, but no one wanted to hire him until Rafael contacted a friend who could give Juan a job in a bus collecting money. He started working and gradually began to enjoy the nightlife again, although it is assumed that he only went out to party and consume alcohol. On February 26, 1996, Juan had gone out with some friends to a bar around 10 p.m. At 12, the bar owner asked him to leave because the more the other customers consumed alcohol, the more they expressed their disgust for Juan, as his face and what he had done were known throughout the country. He had no choice but to board a bus and leave. 2 days later, Rafael received a call from the police, informing him that they had found what appeared to be his son's body near a river. The body was unrecognizable, not due to decomposition, but because it had been beaten, tortured, and assaulted in every possible way, even run over by a car with his hands tied with wire. He was only identified as Juan because he had his identification in his pockets, and next to the body, they had left a newspaper clipping that said, "The Hermoso Syndrome throughout the country." The body was found on the same day that Juan was supposed to turn 20. Some say that the perpetrators were contacts of the officers he had deals with, but it could have been anyone because this young man had made enemies from all sides. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon. Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another Unreal True Crime. The horrible story of Marlene Warren. Marlene Warren was born on April 15, 1950, in Michigan, USA. Growing up without a father, she dreamt of having a large and close-knit family from a young age. This dream soon became a reality when she married a man named John, with whom she had 2 children. However, years later, the family faced an unexpected tragedy when John suddenly passed away from an illness, leaving Marlene alone with her 2 young children. Marlene dedicated herself to work, striving to support her children on her own. 6 years after her husband's death, Marlene met a man named Michael Warren. They soon married, and Michael was involved in the used car business. After marrying, he started his own business in this sector. By this time, Marlene was earning good money and chose to invest in Michael's business, also assisting in its management. The business thrived, and the couple expanded it, buying several properties to rent out, improving their financial situation significantly. The family moved to Wellington, a luxurious suburb of Miami, where they bought a large house. Although their life seemed almost perfect, another tragedy struck in 1988 when Marlene's eldest son died in a car accident, deeply affecting her and her younger son, Joseph. After her son's death, Marlene considered selling the rental properties. While the business was profitable, it was also a constant source of worry. Issues with tenants not paying rent or losing their income were common, and Marlene, being kind-hearted and empathetic due to her own past struggles, found it difficult to evict people. However, she and Michael couldn't afford to let people live in their properties for free. Eventually, Marlene wanted to get out of the business to avoid these moral dilemmas. 2 years had passed since her son's death, and the family was beginning to recover and return to normalcy. However, on the morning of May 26, 1990, something terrible and unexpected occurred. Marlene was at home with her son and 3 of his friends who had come over for breakfast. Their kitchen had a view of the driveway. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and Marlene went to answer it. Her son saw a white Chrysler parked in front of their house. When Marlene opened the front door, She was greeted by a person dressed as a clown, holding 2 balloons and a bouquet of flowers. Marlene commented, "How cute." But then something unexpected happened. The clown who appeared at Marlene Warren's doorstep suddenly pulled out a gun and shot her in the head. Marlene's son and his friends, who were in the house, rushed to the hallway, only to be met with the shocking sight of Marlene bleeding on the ground. The clown, dressed in full costume, stared at them for a few seconds before returning to the white Chrysler and driving away. Marlene's son, despite having an injured leg, urged his friend to drive after the clown, but they were unable to locate the vehicle. Marlene was quickly taken to the hospital in an unconscious state, and the police began their investigation. They first spoke with everyone in the house at the time of the attack. Marlene's son could not identify the assailant due to the costume, gloves, and wig, noting only that the attacker had very dark eyes. His friends added that the clown was quite tall, and that the work shoes worn were strikingly different from the costume. A neighbor walking their dog near Marlene's house also saw the clown but couldn't provide significant information to the police. The investigators started looking for a white Chrysler and sought other evidence. Their first suspicion fell on Michael, Marlene's husband, who had left for a Miami racetrack that morning and was not at home during the attack. Despite having reasons to believe he was involved, such as the family's fondness for clowns and an anonymous tip to investigate Michael and a 26-year-old woman named Sheila Keene, the police found that Michael was around 110 kilometers away from home, making it physically impossible for him to commit the crime. Sheila Keene, who worked at Michael's used car business, was rumored to be having a secret affair with him. This relationship had been speculated by some colleagues. If Michael was in a relationship with another woman and wanted to leave Marlene, he faced a significant financial loss in a divorce, as most of the family assets were in Marlene's name. Despite the lack of concrete evidence linking Michael and Sheila to the crime, the police still considered their involvement probable. Given the disguise used by the assailant, the police considered whether Sheila could have been the clown. Witnesses couldn't confirm the attacker's gender, and Sheila was known for her assertive character. She handled clients who were late on rental payments, often needing to repossess cars, a job in which she was unyielding, and for which she carried a .38 caliber pistol, the same caliber used to shoot Marlene. After the bullet was removed from Marlene's head, it was determined to be from a .38 caliber gun, raising further suspicions about Sheila's potential involvement in the crime. The police revisited Sheila Keene to inspect her firearm, but Sheila claimed that her gun had either been stolen or lost months before Marlene Warren's shooting, leaving the detectives with no solid leads. During their investigation, they learned that Sheila was divorced and that after leaving her husband's house, Sheila moved into a rented apartment, and there were suspicions that Michael Warren, Marlene's husband, was paying for this accommodation. An interesting discovery awaited the police in their investigation regarding the whereabouts of the clown costume, balloons, and flowers used in the crime. 2 days before the attack on Marlene, a woman had entered a costume shop near Sheila's apartment. The shop was closed at the time, but the woman insisted on being served. She urgently requested a clown costume, a wig, face makeup, and a red nose. Despite being told to return the next day as the shop was closing, the woman persisted, and the employees eventually sold her the items. There were no surveillance cameras in the store, so the police had to rely on the employee's verbal description of the woman, who they described as tall and thin with dark hair. When shown photographs by the detectives, the employees indicated that the woman resembled Sheila. The investigation also traced the balloons and flowers to a supermarket located about a kilometer from Sheila's apartment. The seller reported that a woman matching the description given by the costume shop employees had purchased these items just a few hours before Marlene was shot. He added that the customer behaved rudely and somewhat masculinely. 2 days into the investigation, on May 28, The police were informed that Marlene had succumbed to her injuries, and the case was reclassified as a murder. The detectives continued their investigation, seeking more evidence against Sheila. They obtained a warrant to search her apartment. Concurrently, they received a tip about a white Chrysler parked 13 kilometers from Marlene's residence. Upon inspection, the investigators confirmed it was the same vehicle driven by the assailant. Inside, they found long dark hairs and orange fibers that appeared to be from a clown wig. During a search of Sheila's apartment, the police found identical orange particles and work boots that matched the description given by witnesses, similar to those worn by the clown. However, due to the absence of routine DNA analysis at that time, all the evidence against Sheila was circumstantial, which could lead to her acquittal in court. Detectives then turned their attention to how the clown had acquired the car used to reach Marlene's house. They uncovered that about 1.5 months before Marlene's murder, a man had mistakenly rented a car from one of Michael Warren's main competitors. When this mix-up was reported to Michael, his reaction was notably strange. Rather than informing a customer about a mistaken car rental from one of his competitors, Michael Warren told the man to just leave the car in the parking lot and put the keys inside. Michael then asked an employee to take him and Sheila to the parking lot and instructed the employee to keep quiet about the incident. The employee witnessed Michael and Sheila leaving in the same white Chrysler. This happened shortly after a serious disagreement between Michael and his competitors, where Michael had been giving his competitors a negative image in his advertisements, which they disliked. Detectives decided to investigate Michael's business further and found numerous legal infractions, including tax and insurance manipulation. They also found evidence suggesting that Michael had used illegal methods to repossess cars, even when clients had paid on time and met all conditions. During this investigation, police spoke with an employee who recalled an interesting incident where Michael and Marlene had an argument at work. After Marlene left, Michael asked the employee how much it would cost to make his wife disappear. Although this sounded suspicious, detectives still had no evidence linking Michael to the murder. Nevertheless, he was arrested for various business manipulations and initially sentenced to 8 years in prison, but was released after 4 years. In 2002, Michael married Sheila and moved to another state. Although detectives could never prove Michael's involvement in the murder, they continued to monitor him. After moving, Sheila began introducing herself to new acquaintances as a police officer and had dyed her hair from dark to blonde. She and Michael opened a restaurant and seemed to have built a good life. However, rumors began circulating among their employees that Sheila had murdered Michael's ex-wife. Apparently, an employee stumbled upon information about the crime and discovered that the police had suspected them. Still, without definitive proof, the case remained unresolved until it was reopened in 2013. A new investigative team requested a re-examination of all available evidence, as DNA testing and other forensic technologies had significantly advanced since 1990. It took several years to re-examine the evidence. First, the orange fibers found in Sheila's apartment, the car, and the crime scene were compared, showing they were almost identical. The most significant lead came later when experts took DNA samples from several hairs found in the white Chrysler and compared them to Sheila's DNA, which matched perfectly. This provided irrefutable evidence that Sheila had been in the same car the clown used to drive to Marlene's house. Sheila was arrested in 2017, then 54 years old, and continued to deny her guilt. She was denied bail and awaited trial in jail. Michael insisted he had nothing to do with Marlene's murder and believed Sheila was innocent as well. He hired expensive lawyers for her, and the trial had been prolonged for years. In preparation for the trial, the police uncovered some previously unknown facts. About a year after Marlene Warren's murder, an attorney who had worked with Michael Warren on business matters contacted them. He revealed that approximately a year before the murder, Michael had asked him a very strange question. If a husband kills his wife, what happens to the property registered in her name? Would it go to the husband? The attorney was surprised by this question, but advised Michael that if the husband arranged for an acquaintance to commit the murder and the court couldn't link the husband to the killer, he would inherit the woman's assets. Furthermore, the attorney shockingly advised Michael that if the murderer wore some kind of disguise, like a clown's, they would likely never be identified and thus escape punishment. Another shocking confession came from a man whose deceased father had worked for Michael at the time of the murder. He confessed that his father had helped carry out illegal plans for extra money, such as rolling back odometers to sell cars at higher prices. On the day of the murder, Michael asked his father to dispose of the gun and the car used by the murderer after abandoning the Chrysler in the parking lot. Before dying, the man's father revealed that the second car was hidden in a river canal. The police found the car in the canal, confirming the witness's truthfulness, although no evidence survived. Sheila's trial was repeatedly postponed until a final date was set for May 12, 2023. However, on April 25, something unexpected happened. Sheila pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty she would have faced if she lost the murder trial. Her lawyers stated that Sheila was innocent of the murder, but feared for her life, and thus accepted responsibility for someone else's crime. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison for second-degree murder, with about 5.5 years deducted for the time already served and further reduced for good behavior. She was expected to spend an additional 16 to 24 months in prison. As for Michael, his involvement has not been proven, and he remains free. It's unlikely he will ever be charged with his wife's murder, as there is no direct evidence against him. Marlene's son, the sole member of his family, thanked the detectives for uncovering the truth and keeping the case alive for years. Despite the profound tragedy of his mother's death, he overcame his grief, opened his own small construction business, and rebuilt his life. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Crime Analysis Central. See you soon.